I opened my pay stub and saw 75 cents an hour. He thought I would break under the humiliation, especially with my mother's hospital bills. But he had no idea about a pay trap I had built years before. The countdown began. $1.2 million disappeared an hour. 75 cents an hour? You've got to be kidding me. That was the number staring back at me when I opened my pay stub. My name, Riley Stone. Printed in bold letters beside it, beneath the neat, merciless signature of Marcus Hale, our CEO. It wasn't a clerical error. It was intentional. And worse, it wasn't private. The payroll system updated company-wide. 17,000 employees could see the humiliation Marcus had chosen to carve into my life. Almost immediately, my phone buzzed. A message from a colleague lit up the screen. "Riley, is this a mistake?" My throat tightened. No, it wasn't. It was Marcus Hale's message to everyone that I had been stripped of worth, reduced to a joke. The irony was unbearable. For 12 years, I had kept this company standing, as workforce systems coordinator. I wasn't on the covers of magazines, or shaking hands with investors, but my work touched every person's paycheck. Every overtime approval, every schedule that kept production from collapsing. I was the invisible hand keeping chaos from swallowing Marcus's empire. Marcus never cared for invisible hands. He cared about legacy. His dream was to hand the company to his son, Brandon, a man who wore arrogance like cologne and treated the office like a playground. Brandon hadn't earned the seat I filled. He had inherited it, and to make room for him, Marcus had chosen to grind me down to 75 cents an hour. The contrast couldn't have been sharper, and beneath the sting of humiliation, terror hit me. My mother's heart medication wasn't optional. Without it, she couldn't survive the month. My daughter's college acceptance letter still hung on the fridge, her dream just within reach. But dreams don't wait for pennies. At 75 cents an hour, both their futures were being stolen in real time. Shock hollowed me out. But humiliation lit something else. An ember. I didn't shout. I didn't protest. I simply stared at the number, knowing Marcus had lit a fire he could never contain. For 12 years, my fingerprints had been all over the veins of Hale Dynamics, though no one ever saw them. 17,000 employees depended on my work, though most of them never knew my name. I wasn't an executive shaking hands with investors, or a face on glossy magazines. I was the one who kept the machine breathing, the quiet architect of every paycheck that landed on time, every overtime credit that matched the hours worked, every schedule that prevented chaos from consuming the floor. As workforce systems coordinator, I built the routines others took for granted. Truck drivers knew when to load shipments, because my system aligned their hours with warehouse shifts. Engineers were paid for every overnight they sacrificed, because I corrected the overtime codes before payroll locked. Entire factories kept humming because I made sure there were no gaps in staffing. No double bookings. No silent collapses. Pride was the only reward I had. Pride, and the knowledge that, without me, the empire Marcus Hale bragged about would have cracked long ago. I remembered one crisis as vividly as if it were yesterday. A payroll glitch had miscalculated bonuses across 3 divisions, shorting hundreds of employees during the holiday season. The union had lawyers ready. Employees furious. Lawsuits inevitable. I stayed 48 hours straight, combing through records, reconciling every entry until the numbers balanced and the anger subsided. Marcus had walked into the press conference afterward. Shoulders square, voice steady, telling the cameras he had personally resolved the issue. My name was never mentioned. He basked in applause, built on my exhaustion. That was the rhythm of my career. I held the company together. He claimed the glory. And yet, even pride has a way of hollowing out when it is carried alone. In quiet moments, the loneliness pressed harder than any crisis. Pride didn't cover the rent increases. Pride didn't pay hospital bills. I still saw my mother at her kitchen table, pills spread out in neat lines, counting and recounting, deciding which days she could skip her heart medication without collapsing. I still heard my daughter's voice, soft but sharp, as she held her acceptance letter. "Mom, will I still get to go? Will I still be able to study at the school I dreamed of?" That question cut deeper than Marcus's signature ever could. I had built stability for thousands, but I couldn't promise stability for the 2 people who depended on me most. The pride I carried in silence suddenly felt like a fragile glass, polished and unbroken on the outside, but ready to shatter with the smallest crack. I was the hidden architect of Hale Dynamics, the one Marcus Hale could never replace, though he would try. And in the quiet between the storms, I began to realize, being invisible was no longer enough. The announcement was staged like a celebration, though to me it felt like a public execution. Marcus Hale stood at the head of the conference table, his voice amplified through the intercom, so that every floor, every cubicle, Every break room could hear him. He spoke with the tone of a man unveiling progress. But his eyes found me first, and the gleam in them was unmistakable. This wasn't about progress. It was about replacing me. Today, he declared, we begin a new chapter. A chapter of innovation, energy, and family leadership. He drew out the last words like an oath. I already knew what was coming, but the sting burned just as sharp when he said it aloud. I'm proud to announce that my son, Brandon Hale, will take over as Workforce Systems Coordinator. Effective immediately. There was polite applause, the kind that felt forced. Like air leaving a balloon. My chest tightened as faces turned toward me. Some curious. Some pitying. Others deliberately blank. 12 years of work. Erased in one sentence. Brandon walked in then, wearing a suit that looked borrowed. And a smirk that was entirely his own. He adjusted the tie he clearly didn't know how to wear, and shook hands with the nearest executives. His confidence inflated by nothing more than his last name. Then he turned toward me, and the smirk widened. I'll be cleaning up the mess, he said casually, loud enough for the room to hear. No offense, Riley, but your system's been outdated for years. It's time to clear out the old junk. He chuckled, as if the last 12 years of my life were nothing more than clutter in a storage closet. A few nervous laughs followed, not because anyone agreed with him, but because no one dared to cross Marcus's son. Humiliation settled like a weight in my stomach. I wanted to shout, to lay out every late night. Every crisis averted, every pay cycle saved by my intervention. I wanted to remind them all that without me, this company would have drowned years ago, but I said nothing. My silence was not weakness. It was restraint, because beneath the sting of being dismissed so publicly, something darker stirred. Anger. Cold, precise anger. The kind that doesn't lash out in the moment, but waits, sharpens, and bides its time. Marcus scanned the room, soaking in the scene as if he had just secured the company's future. He didn't see the irony. He didn't see the danger. All he saw was his son in the chair I had built, holding authority he didn't understand. I sat still, my hands folded in my lap. My face calm, but inside, a storm raged. They thought they had silenced me, stripped me of dignity. What they had really done was hand me the one weapon Marcus could never anticipate. Patience. There is a difference between destruction and withdrawal. One is loud, reckless, and obvious. The other is silent, patient, and devastating in its inevitability. I didn't need to sabotage anything. I only needed to stop protecting them. For 12 years, I had carried the system on my back. Every morning before the office woke, I logged in to review a cascade of warnings, red flags, small anomalies, discrepancies that, if left untouched, would spiral into chaos. They weren't errors in design. They were inevitabilities of a living, breathing workforce of 17,000 people. Systems don't bend without a hand to guide them. I was that hand, and for 12 years, I corrected what no one else saw. Patching leaks, balancing fragile gears, making the impossible seem effortless. Now, stripped of dignity and replaced by a boy who smirked at my life's work, I simply stopped. I didn't pull plugs or write malicious code. I didn't need to. I only chose not to type in the corrections. Not to override the warnings. Not to click resolve on the issues that appeared like clockwork. I folded my hands, stared at the monitor, and let the red alerts pile up. On Brandon's first day at my desk, the system gave him his first test. A flashing red box appeared on his screen, warning of a payroll scheduling conflict in the Midwest division. If left alone, the error would double book hundreds of workers and drain the budget in overtime. My heart tightened as I watched from a quiet corner of the room. This was the kind of glitch I had smoothed out countless times. A domino waiting to fall. Brandon glanced at it, shrugged, and clicked the notification closed. He didn't even read the description. To him, it was an annoyance, not a warning. Just another glitch, he muttered, loud enough for a nearby analyst to hear. He leaned back in his chair, scrolling through emails with a grin, oblivious to the storm he had just invited. That was the moment I knew. The first domino had shifted. It was strange, almost serene. I felt no rush of vengeance, no savage thrill. What filled me instead was a calm, deliberate certainty. For years, I had been the invisible wall between Marcus's empire and its own collapse. He had taken that wall for granted, kicked it down, and installed his son in its place. Now, he would discover what the world looked like without it. Silence was my rebellion. Restraint was my weapon. I didn't need to shout or argue. All I had to do was let go. In that stillness, a decision hardened inside me. I would not run to fix their mistakes. I would not shield them from the consequences of arrogance. The empire Marcus Hale worshipped was built on illusions I had sustained in secret. Without me, those illusions would fracture. One red alert at a time, and as Brandon dismissed the warning that had once demanded my precision, I felt an ember of certainty burn steady in my chest. The fall had already begun. Brandon wanted a moment to prove himself. You could see it in the way he leaned forward in my old chair. Hands hovering above the keyboard, like a pianist ready to strike the opening note of a symphony. The system dashboard stretched across the screen, glowing with red alerts and amber warnings, each one demanding careful attention, each one whispering 1,000 hidden consequences. He didn't understand that. To him, the warnings weren't signals to be studied. They were obstacles to be cleared. "This is easy," he boasted to the analyst standing nearby. "Watch this." Then, with the confidence of someone who had never earned the right to be confident, Brandon clicked the button I had never touched in 12 years. Approve all. The sound was nothing more than a soft tap of plastic, but it hit me like a gunshot. My pulse spiked. My breath caught in my throat. I had always known the system was fragile, but seeing him push that single command sent a chill racing down my spine. The effect was immediate. The screen began to cascade with green checks, line after line, flashing as if problems were vanishing. To an untrained eye, it looked efficient, powerful, decisive. Brandon grinned, turning to the analyst. "See? Problem solved." That's leadership, but I knew better. The system wasn't resolving the issues. It was multiplying them. Every red alert he bypassed was duplicated across the network. One payroll conflict in the Midwest became 1,000 mismatched entries scattered across every division. A small overtime miscalculation ballooned into hundreds of double shifts, all logged as payable. Delivery schedules overlapped, canceled each other out, then reappeared as new requests. The machine was replicating chaos at a speed no human could reverse. I felt my hands tighten into fists against my sides, nails pressing into my palms. This was the moment I had both dreaded and expected. The first domino, pushed not by me, but by the arrogance of a boy desperate to impress his father. The analyst didn't notice. To him, it looked like efficiency, like progress. He even clapped Brandon on the back. "Nice work," he said. Brandon smirked, basking in a triumph that was nothing more than a mirage. I stood at a distance, silent. Every fiber of me wanted to rush forward, to stop it, to undo what I knew would soon spiral into catastrophe. But I didn't move. I had promised myself I would no longer carry the weight Marcus had stripped from me. The hum of the servers filled the room, steady and indifferent, like a heartbeat that didn't care who lived or died. And as I watched the lines of false approvals race down the screen, I felt a chill settle deep inside me. The dominoes had started to fall. And nothing, not Marcus, not Brandon, not even me, could stop them now, for the first time in years. The burden was no longer mine, and the silence of my restraint was louder than any warning I could have spoken. The cracks became fractures in less than an hour. What began as a few quiet anomalies on the system dashboard spread into every corner of Hale Dynamics like wildfire. Payroll departments reported double entries, missing hours, and bonuses pushed to accounts that no longer existed. Shift managers scrambled, discovering their rosters showed the same employees scheduled for 2 locations at once. Trucks idled in loading bays with no drivers assigned, while others were dispatched without cargo. By the time the first 60 minutes had passed, the losses were staggering. $1.2 million an hour. Not in projections or estimates. Real money hemorrhaging from the system in ways no one could contain. Vendors demanded answers, deliveries were delayed, and clients called to say contracts were in jeopardy. The system that had once been my quiet masterpiece was now Brandon's battlefield, and the casualties were piling up. On the factory floor, the human cost exploded. Workers who had been underpaid suddenly found their checks inflated, while others weren't paid at all. Confusion turned to anger. In the Midwest, a group of machinists walked off their shift and filmed themselves holding their pay stubs to the camera. "This is Hale Dynamics," one shouted, voice cracking with fury. "They can't even pay us right. We're not working until they fix it." Within minutes, the video spread across social media, collecting shares and comments faster than the company could respond. Hashtags accusing the firm of corruption and exploitation began trending. The dominoes I had always studied were collapsing, and there was no one left inside the company capable of catching them. In the executive wing, Marcus Hale was unraveling. Reports described him storming through hallways, barking at IT teams, demanding instant fixes that didn't exist. He slammed his fist on a conference table during a meeting, shouting, "It's the system. The system is broken." His words echoed through glass walls, but the faces staring back at him told the truth. The system wasn't broken. He was. And yet, Even as chaos consumed his empire, Marcus clung to arrogance. He refused to admit error, refused to acknowledge that handing control to his son had sparked the collapse. "We'll get this under control," he insisted, voice cracking under pressure. But behind him, screens filled with endless red alerts told another story, one he could no longer silence. The chaos was no longer confined to data. It was alive, spreading, and every hour it devoured another $1 million of his kingdom. And still, Marcus Hale refused to see that the disaster wasn't a glitch. It was the consequence of pride. The boardroom was a storm, but Marcus Hale stood in the center, as if shouting alone could calm the waves. His face was flushed, his tie loosened, his hand slamming against the polished oak table with each word. "The system is broken," he roared. "This is what happens when you let one person control too much. Riley Stone built this mess. And she's the reason we're bleeding millions every hour." His words echoed through the glass walls, spilling into the hall, where assistants and analysts pretended not to listen. My name rolled off his tongue like a curse, as though I weren't the one who had saved his empire a dozen times before. I sat quietly in the back corner, not invited, but not entirely dismissed, watching the man who had humiliated me try to salvage his authority with arrogance. "Find her errors," Marcus snapped at the IT director. "Dig through her code. Her overrides. Whatever she's done, she sabotaged us. No one else could have caused this." The director shifted uncomfortably, his team already combing through audit trails and access logs. Screens glowed across the wall, lines of data streaming faster than most eyes could follow. Marcus paced behind them, muttering about incompetence, about betrayal. He never once considered that the truth might be closer to home. Then the lead analyst spoke. His voice was careful, but firm. "Sir, we've traced the approvals that triggered the cascade. They all carry the same digital signature." He paused, swallowing hard. "It's Brandon Hale's." The room fell into silence so sharp it cut the air. Marcus froze, his jaw clenched, his knuckles white against the edge of the table. For a moment, it looked as though the floor had dropped out beneath him. "That's impossible," he said, the arrogance still clinging to his tone. "You must be reading it wrong. Run it again." But the analyst shook his head. "We ran it 3 times. The logs are consistent. Brandon used the approval function. That's what replicated the errors." The denial in Marcus's eyes flickered, but he forced his voice louder, angrier. "He wouldn't make a mistake like that. He's my son." He was cleaning up her outdated processes. "This is still Riley's fault." His words landed hollow. Even his most loyal directors avoided his gaze. There's silence and unspoken admission that the Emperor's clothes were gone. I remained still, hands folded in my lap, saying nothing. Every muscle in my body ached to shout the truth, to expose the years of work I had poured into keeping this fragile empire alive. But silence was stronger. Silence forced them to look at Marcus, at Brandon, at the chaos they had unleashed, and in that silence, I felt it. The faintest taste of justice. Sweet, sharp, undeniable. Not the justice of courts or contracts, but the kind that comes when arrogance finally collapses under its own weight. The boardroom, already tense from the revelation of the audit logs, cracked open into chaos when Brandon finally spoke. His face was pale, his confidence drained, sweat gathering at his collar. He looked at Marcus, not with pride, but with fear. "You told me to do it," he blurted. His voice cracked, and every director around the table leaned forward in shock. "You said to hit approve. You said it was the fastest way to fix everything." For a moment, silence suffocated the room. No one moved. The words hung there like a blade suspended above Marcus's head. The father's face darkened, fury and disbelief twisting his features. "Brandon," he hissed. Not another word. But the damage was already done. The board had heard it. The arrogance of Marcus's leadership was unraveling in real time, and now it carried his son's panicked confession. I sat in the corner, watching the empire eat itself alive. It was surreal. Marcus's attempt to crown his heir had instead exposed the hollow core of his dynasty. Then came the blow that sealed Brandon's downfall. A notification buzzed across one of the director's phones. Within seconds, the screen filled with a shaky video recorded on an employee's tablet. Brandon's voice, unmistakable, rang through the room. "Look at this. I fixed Riley's mess with one click." He bragged, grinning, tapping the approve-all button as colleagues chuckled nervously in the background. "That's leadership, right there." The board stared in horrified silence as the clip looped. Brandon's smirk, his careless words, his self-congratulation. All of it spilled across internal channels and leaked to social media within minutes. The world now had proof that incompetence, not sabotage, had triggered the 1.2 million per hour disaster. Brandon stammered, his voice breaking. That was taken out of context. I was joking. Just joking. His hands shook as he shoved the phone away, but the director's expressions told him what he already knew. The context didn't matter. The truth was undeniable. Marcus, red-faced and desperate, slammed his fist down. Enough. This circus ends now. He gestured sharply toward his assistant. Bring in the external team. Within hours, a group of outside consultants was ushered into the building, armed with promises of quick fixes and technical wizardry. To the public, it looked decisive. Reporters camped outside the glass doors, saw specialists in suits carrying laptops and binders. Speaking in hushed tones, investors clung to the appearance of control. Marcus smiled grimly for the cameras, projecting the image of a man who had acted swiftly, who had contained the storm, and for a fleeting moment, it seemed like he had won. Systems slowed their collapse. Patches applied here and there. Red alerts dimmed temporarily. The bleeding looked less severe. To Marcus, it was a victory. A false one. He believed he had silenced me, erased my relevance, and forced the crisis back into the shadows. But I knew better. A false patch doesn't heal a wound. It hides it. Until the next blow makes it split wide open. For a brief moment, Marcus allowed himself to believe he had steadied the ship. The outside consultants were everywhere, hunched over servers, typing commands, drawing flowcharts across whiteboards, to the cameras outside. It looked like control had been restored. The red alerts that had flooded the screens now flickered less often. Marcus clasped his hands behind his back, his jaw tight, projecting the image of a man who had taken decisive action. But I knew what those dimmed alerts really meant. Patches, not cures. A bandage slapped over a hemorrhage. By the third day, the consultants called Marcus into a closed-door session with the board. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. Word travels fast when panic sets in. One of the IT directors recounted the meeting to a colleague, who whispered it to another, until it landed in my inbox, like a secret passed hand to hand. Sir, the lead consultant had said, we've mapped the system's architecture. It's unlike anything we've seen, layered with manual overrides and undocumented protocols. These aren't bugs, they're the glue that's kept it standing, and we can't replicate them. Marcus bristled. Then fix them. That's what I brought you here for. The consultant's voice, calm but firm, delivered the blow. Only the original designer can stabilize it. Without her, every fix we attempt creates 2 new failures. The system isn't broken, it's resisting us. It was never meant to run without Riley Stone. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. For a flicker of a second, Marcus's arrogance cracked. He had placed his empire in the hands of outsiders. And they had just told him that the one person he cast aside, the one he humiliated, was the only key left. But before he could regain his footing, the second blow landed. A major investor, Titan Holdings, released a statement to the press. Their words cut sharper than any consultant's report. We no longer have confidence in Hale Dynamics' leadership or infrastructure. Effective immediately, we are divesting our stake. Within minutes, the markets responded. The company's stock plummeted, a freefall that sent traders scrambling. Phones rang endlessly as brokers tried to salvage positions. Screens bled red, numbers ticking downward faster than Marcus could breathe. The boardroom descended into chaos. Directors shouted over one another, demanding explanations, urging Marcus to step aside. He slammed his fists on the table, shouting that it wasn't over. That this was just a temporary setback. But his voice no longer carried authority. It carried desperation. From the outside, the picture was clear. For a moment, Marcus had stood tall, believing the storm could be contained. Now, the hope he clung to had shattered, replaced by a reality too sharp to ignore. His empire was crumbling. Not by sabotage, but by his own hand, and as his kingdom slipped into freefall. I remained silent, watching the inevitable unfold. The fall was absolute. Marcus Hale and his son Brandon lost everything. The board stripped them of authority. The investors abandoned them. And the empire they had clung to as unshakable collapsed under its own arrogance. Worse still, when Marcus turned to the company's insurers to stem the bleeding, the door was slammed shut. Investigators uncovered falsified records, doctored policies,